been battling bombs and bomb makers all over the world. They've been blown up, tricked and targeted by an enemy fixated on their destruction. They are the bomb technicians of the British Army. They are the bomb hunters.
Their job is one of the most dangerous in the world. They're known as ATOs, Ammunition Technical Officers, and for 10 years, I was one of them. Their job is to beat the bomb, to collect evidence to find the bomber, and above all, to preserve life. This film tells their story.
I am in awe of the bomb hunters. Recently, I had the privilege of writing about all the recipients of the George Cross. Nearly half have been awarded for bomb disposal work, from the Blitz in 1940 to Afghanistan today. Over those 70 years, the challenges and dangers facing ATOs have increased almost exponentially. Staff Sergeant Olaf Schmidt is one of the most recent recipients of the George Cross. He was killed in the autumn of 2009 trying to deal with a complex IED in Helmand province. The officer commanding his battle group called him the bravest man I have ever met. But bravery is not a word the ATOs in this film use of themselves. Their modesty and professionalism is just one of their many attributes. In Northern Ireland, Dave Young dealt with a lethal blast incendiary in a building that was already on fire. In Iraq, Kevin Iverson confronted the most high-tech IED known to man, a weapon that had just killed a close friend. Chris Hunter, who presents the film, was personally targeted several times by the bombers themselves.
Britain's bomb disposal teams have been fighting a life and death game of cat and mouse for 4 decades against the terrorists of the world and their lethal weapon of choice, the IED.
IEDs, improvised explosive devices. 2 years ago, it would have been an unfamiliar phrase, but now we're hearing it all too often on the television and radio. That word, improvised, suggests they're almost homely, a little bit amateurish perhaps, but these are anything but.
Over the course of 40 years, IEDs have wreaked havoc all over the world. From the shopping centres of Northern Ireland to the highways of Iraq, from the busy streets of rush hour London to the wide expanses of Afghanistan.
For decades, the Provisional IRA were considered to be the world's leading bomb makers, but the level of technical sophistication they achieved in 30 years was superseded in just over a year in Iraq and Afghanistan. Every single day, the bombers are adding more and more new tricks. For the bomb hunters, it's like a game of lethal extreme chess.
This lethal game is being played out every day in Afghanistan. Over 70% of the casualties in this violent war of insurgency are caused by IEDs. The work of clearing them falls to an elite band of highly trained soldiers, the bomb hunters. They are dealing with lethal devices in huge numbers, often under fire, and taking on a skilled and ruthless enemy. The improvised devices they face are infinitely varied and lethally unpredictable. Dealing with them requires technical skill, an iron nerve, and the ability to outsmart the terrorist by thinking outside the box.
We considered ourselves to be part of an elite group within the forces because we'd been through so much training and experience. And currently in Afghanistan, you won't find an ammunition technician working as a bomb disposal operator unless he's got 7 or 8 years experience.
I would say what they're doing in Afghanistan is many times more dangerous than what I did in Iraq. And I felt that what I did in Iraq was pretty dangerous.
To me, they really are strong and consistent characters, and rare, very rare.
Over my 10-year career as a bomb disposal operator, I witnessed firsthand the cunning of the world's bomb makers. In Northern Ireland, I was personally targeted by the IRA, who drew me into a killing zone with a tactic known as a come-on. In 2001, I trained Colombia's bomb disposal teams. The terrorists they were fighting were themselves being trained by the IRA, a stark example of the international nature of terrorist bomb making. And in Iraq, I came face to face with an insurgent commander, watching me deal with one of his bomb maker's devices, one of the largest I'd ever encountered. That car bomb in Iraq contained over 400 pounds of explosive. But I've come to a quarry in the West Country to demonstrate the destructive power of even the smallest IED. Explosives expert Sidney Alford and I are making a simple device using just 4 pounds of plastic explosive, about the same weight as 2 bags of sugar. All bombs work in the same way. Power is sent to a detonator which fires the explosive. But what makes IEDs so attractive to the bomb makers and so dangerous for the bomb hunters is that they can be triggered in many different ways. We're laying a command wire device connected directly to the trigger by the cable Sidney's carrying. If this was Iraq or Afghanistan, the insurgents would bury both bomb and wire. They would run it back to a concealed firing point at a safe distance, but with a clear view of the bomb to await the arrival of their target. Then, at just the right moment, they would detonate.
Stand by! Firing!
Even a small bomb, like this, produces so much heat that gases in the air expand rapidly, creating a lethal, high-pressure blast wave. Anyone within 20 meters would die instantly because the pressure change ruptures air-filled organs like the bowels and lungs. If the bomb contained nails or ball bearings, people up to 100 meters away would suffer serious injuries. And this was a device containing just 4 pounds of explosive. Buried beneath this desert landscape is a bomb 100 times larger, the size of the biggest devices used in Iraq and Afghanistan today.
3, 2, 1.
The blast wave travels outwards at thousands of kilometers an hour. This bomb would be fatal to anyone within 150 meters and would injure people and damage property up to half a kilometer away. When bomb disposal first began, during the Blitz in 1940, the bombs that rained down from German aircraft were even larger. The job of those early bomb disposal men, my father was one of them, was to make safe UXBs, or unexploded bombs. Because they were mass-produced, each time was always the same. We call these conventional munitions, still dangerous, but largely predictable. After the war, a new unpredictable threat emerged: IEDs. Using everyday components, these cunning devices would change warfare forever and prove the perfect weapon for the wars of insurgency that flared up all over the world. In the 50s and 60s, British bomb disposal teams faced their first IEDs, hidden in satchels and flasks in terrorist wars from Aden to Cyprus. But the IED came of age much closer to home. When Northern Irish civil rights marches descended into violence in 1969, the British Army were called in, unwittingly sparking the most vicious bombing campaign that the world had ever seen. That campaign began, almost innocently, on this innocuous-looking roundabout in North Belfast. In the early hours of March the 1st, 1970, a taxi driver spotted 3 men jumping off the plinth of the statue that stood here then.
When the driver looked more closely, he found a polythene-wrapped bundle here on this plinth at the base of a 10-foot-high statue of the Reverend Roaring Hugh Hanna, a 19th century Presbyterian minister famous for his anti-Catholic views. The British Army bomb squad then consisted of one operator and his assistant based 10 miles away in Lisbon. By the time they arrived here, the bomb had already exploded, blowing a hole in the statue. The timing of that explosion, 3 a.m., suggests the bombers specifically tried to avoid injuring anybody. This was a symbolic act of defiance.
It was achieved with the crudest of IEDs. A timer device, triggered by a clock linked to a battery and detonator that initiated a small charge of gelignite. But if anyone thought this was going to be a conflict of small devices and symbolic gestures, they were tragically mistaken. The IRA bombing campaign ramped up with incredible speed. They targeted everything from shops and hotels to utilities and public transport. Their aim was not to kill. Often they issued warnings, but to make daily life impossible and force the politicians to negotiate. In response, the army increased the number of ATOs from 1 to 3. But the sheer number of call-outs, around 200 a month, was a huge challenge, as ATO Mike Coldrick discovered when he arrived in Belfast.
In the early days, it was quite manic because we were doing 24-hour shifts, and we could get up to 24 jobs in a shift. And that's all kinds of incidents, and you had to treat each and every one as though it was a real device, and you had to get to them and deal with them as quickly as possible, then go on to the next one. And you'd be doing that from early morning right through the night into the following morning. The thing that you were running on, of course, was adrenaline, and you felt as though you were doing something useful to combat the terrorists.
But the terrorists were evolving at an alarming speed. ATOs were getting the measure of the IRA's simple timer devices. But when the terrorists claimed their first ATO victim, Captain David Stewartson, in September 1971. They killed him with a cunning new device, the booby trap. Operators like Dave Young quickly became aware of these sinister devices, specifically designed to kill the ATO.
A booby trap, by definition, is a victim-operated bomb. And normally it would need someone to move something or pick something up or drive something away or open a gate or a door. And they'd often use close-peg switches with insulators that were pulled out of place by fishing line to complete a circuit, or magnets on a Tupperware box with mercury tilt switches under cars, that sort of thing, or pressure plates. They all came into the category of bombs that would be set off by the victim.
They had, since 1971, enlisted the expertise of television engineers and engineers in microelectronics, and they've been producing some quite sophisticated devices. There was an IRA recruiting poster plastered on a wall. When the troops were leaving, one of them decided he would rip down this particular poster. Out came some circuitry. Now, fortunately, the poster pulled the circuit apart before the bomb could detonate. But inside there was a very substantial device, which certainly would have killed him and anybody else in the immediate vicinity, simply because they predicted that one of the soldiers would probably rip that device off the wall.
The bombing campaign ramped up remorselessly, and in March 1972, the ATOs suffered their darkest moment yet.
One night, there was a terrible incident, and two of my colleagues, Tony Botchell and Chris Cracknell, were killed dealing with a single bomb. They were killed together. At that time, the officer commanding 321 Bomb Disposal Unit was Major Bernard Calladine, and he issued orders that if anything untoward was seen in any way resembling what had killed the two boys, he was to be summoned to the scene straight away. That's exactly what happened. And sadly, he was killed too. So that was three operators in a 2-week period. And this concentrated the minds of people in the technical directorate, and they decided that a fundamental change was immediately necessary.
In those early days, ATOs were ill-equipped, and most had received only the most rudimentary IED training. Now, 4 of their number were dead. It was time for the bomb hunters to begin their own rapid evolution in the war against the IED. John Gaff was one of the first ATOs to use a new piece of equipment, the bomb suit.
When I arrived in Northern Ireland, the new suits came in. There was a bit of a sort of apron built into it, and there was a jacket which covered your front and arms. The helmet was a brand new type of helmet with a proper visor in front. In the helmet was a built-in tiny mic, so that whilst you were at a device and dealing with it, you could say what you were doing, and this was all recorded immediately on a little tape recorder, and therefore any new information that was discovered could be immediately transmitted, recorded, and used to help any other ATO in the future.
Facing a level of threat never before known in bomb disposal, new tactics and procedures were rapidly introduced on the ground. The team would set up an ICP, incident control point, about 150 meters from the bomb, parking their vehicles in a V to provide some protection from detonation. No ATO would approach any kind of device without a bomb suit. And after the deaths of Tony Butcher and Chris Cracknell, the ATO would always approach alone. Bomb disposal had become a single-man risk. For the first time, psychometric tests were introduced to ensure that those selected for ATO work were made of the right stuff.
They are tested carefully. They want the people who are not attention seekers. They want the people who are not gung-ho. They don't want the ones that get on the horse and beat it to hell so that it can beat everybody else. They just don't want that sort of people. They're not the right sort of people. They don't have the right temperament. The psychometric testing wants a level-headed individual.
Methodical, able to analyse the situation and make quick decisions, and the right decisions.
You must be able to formulate a sensible plan of action, but be prepared to change it when he receives new information or a better suggestion.
ATO training was expanded, and intelligence from Northern Ireland was constantly fed back to trainees. On what became known as the Long Walk, bomb technicians learned a new mantra: walk, stop, observe. And to look in everything around them for the absence of the normal and the presence of the abnormal.
You had a lot going through your mind, and the training focused your mind on what you had to do. It was quite physically arduous as well, so you had a lot to cope with, and hardly any brain power left to worry about the consequences of things going wrong.
You think to yourself, well, I am perfectly well trained to do this, I know what I'm doing, and you push all the fear and the bravado, if you like, into the back of your mind, and you just don't let it interfere with what you're doing, because only when the fear interferes with what you're doing is it dangerous. You should never be without fear. I don't think any ATO is without fear. I'm sure it's not.
The other crucial innovation of the early 70s was a device to attack the bomb itself. It would soon become a key weapon in the ATO's new armoury. It was called a disruptor. First developed in the 60s to attack mines at sea, it was quickly adapted for the beleaguered bomb disposal teams. A small explosive charge fires a jet of water into the bomb at more than 5 times the speed of sound, faster even than a high-velocity bullet. It could penetrate metal and was designed to destroy the bomb's trigger mechanism before it could detonate the explosive. The disruptor also had another purpose. It stopped the bomb detonating without destroying it, leaving behind crucial evidence for forensic analysis.
Behind me, there was a whole network of weapons intelligence section people who were analysing the forensic evidence that I was gaining from devices I neutralised.
We all had to be fingerprinted for a start, so that they could eliminate the ATOs from fingerprints that they'd found on bits of the devices. They found where detonators came from. They could tell you where it was made, and sometimes, you know, almost the name of the chap that sold it or bought it.
Whenever they cut plastic tape, they very often used their fingers and left perfect fingerprints on the sticky side. They often made mistakes, and if they did, the police and the forensic science people and the intelligence people capitalised on those mistakes, and quite often they ended up in court.
In the rapidly evolving lethal game of cat and mouse, the bomb hunters had regained some ground, and the forensics they'd gathered had already led to arrests. But the bomb makers were poised to make their next move, and it would be a shocking one. Their target was Belfast city centre on a busy Friday afternoon in the summer of 1972.
If I'd been standing here at 2:10 on that July afternoon, I'd have heard an explosion about half a mile down here at Smithfield bus station. It didn't cause much of a stir at the time, except in the bus station itself and in nearby Samuel Street, where almost every window in the road had been shattered. 6 minutes later, another device detonated, a suitcase bomb in a hotel on the Antrim Road. 6 minutes after that, there was another explosion at the York Road railway station that brought down the roof. A short while later, a car bomb exploded on the Crumlin Road in a taxi rank. There'd been 4 bombs in just over 20 minutes. Belfast had become a war zone. Plumes of smoke filled the sky. Yet miraculously, no one had been killed. But all that changed at 2:48 with the 5th bomb.
Without warning, a bomb exploded at Oxford Street bus station, leaving 6 people dead and another 40 seriously injured. And still, it wasn't over. 2 minutes after the Oxford Street bomb, there was an explosion on Limestone Road. Seconds later, a bread van blew up outside the York Hotel. More bombs followed. On Queen Elizabeth Bridge, near the Liverpool Bar, in a seed merchant's on Garmoyle Street, at a garage on the Lisbon Road.
The final bombing that day occurred at 3:15. That particular device was planted outside the Cave Hill Road shopping centre. 50 pounds of high explosive in a Ford Cortina that had been hijacked earlier in the day. It damaged shops and buildings out to a huge radius and killed 3 people. It was the 21st bomb to be detonated in just over an hour. They called it Bloody Friday. The terror campaign had reached new heights, and the IRA had just introduced a lethal new weapon of choice, the car bomb.
Bloody Friday, of course, was a tremendous tragedy. The police and the security forces were moving people away from one device that they could actually see, and they were moving into the danger area of another device that they didn't know was there.
The world had never before seen a terrorist attack on such a huge scale. Sidney Alford and I are placing 4 pounds of plastic explosive in this Jaguar, a fraction of the size used in each of the 10 car bombs that detonated so close together on that terrible day.
This is the mangled roof of the car, and behind me, the damage speaks for itself. We put 2 kilos of high explosive in there. The typical car bomb in Northern Ireland was about 200 kilos of high explosive, 100 times the explosive power of what we've just seen. You could imagine the damage if something like that detonated inside a busy city centre.
Even this tiny amount of explosive shows how the car itself becomes a lethal addition to the destructive power of the bomb. Hundreds of metal fragments are travelling at supersonic speed in all directions. The door was still flying through the air 20 seconds after the bomb went off and landed over 100 metres away. Smaller fragments travelled even further. It's appallingly clear why the car bomb appealed so much to the bombers.
The appeal largely was the fact that they could put a large amount of explosive in one place. They could put it anonymously. With so many cars driving around, you can't suspect every car. They could place it where they wanted and when they wanted. If the car bomb went off, it produced maximum damage, maximum publicity, and maximum disruption of what was going on around.
There's a tremendous amount of fragmentation comes off a car bomb. And then you have secondary effects of windows and debris coming out of buildings which may be all around you. So if you're not in the right place, you can be in a world of hurt very quickly. Very high velocity fragments can come off car bombs. I've actually seen a fragment from a car bomb go through both sides of a flak jacket and hit a colleague's revolver, which then fired it straight down into the ground. And that happened instantly before the bang even reached our ears.
Once more, the bombers had leapt ahead. An army report to Downing Street read, "The IRA has the initiative and is causing disruption out of all proportion to the small numbers engaged." Faced with this escalation in the game, the bomb hunters fought back with another innovation, known to ATOs as wheelbarrow.
They were basic vehicles, and they could carry a shotgun. And eventually, as time went on, various devices were developed that improved the ability of the wheelbarrow to do its job. I mean, it could carry a disruptor, it could carry 2 disruptors. Later on, it could carry cameras, and one could monitor what was going on.
The problem with a car bomb is one of access, first of all. Before you could render the thing safe, you had to gain access to the car. And approaching it with a wheelbarrow, the remote control vehicle, you could have a good look at it with a TV camera. But quite often, the small charge that enabled you to gain access would actually sufficiently disrupt the device and do half the job for you in one foul swoop. So that could be done quite quickly with practice.
It meant that you could take tools to a device without an operator having to go down personally, so it kept him out of the danger area. If a machine was destroyed, no problem, we could buy another machine. Much easier than taking an operator to a funeral.
The robot was a huge leap forward for the ATOs. But in the deadly cat-and-mouse IED game, the late 70s saw the IRA make their next lethal move. Of all the dark days of the Troubles, August the 27th, 1979 was one of the darkest yet. At around lunchtime, Lord Mountbatten was killed off Ireland's west coast when a radio-controlled bomb detonated on his boat. 3 others, 2 of them children, were killed at the same time.
Just a few hours later, a small military convoy, 2 4-ton trucks and a Land Rover in front, would drive along this road, transporting members of A Company's 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, to their barracks in Newry. It was a bank holiday Monday, and many of those troops had just returned from leave. But with news of Mountbatten's death just in, there wouldn't have been much of a holiday mood in the back of those trucks.
The convoy approached Narrowwater Castle, an Elizabethan fort guarding the neck of Carlingford Loch, the boundary between Northern Ireland and the Republic. As they passed the lay-by opposite the castle grounds, their journey came to an abrupt and violent end.
There was a trailer parked here, piled high with hay. It seemed innocent enough, as all the fields around here were being harvested at the time. This particular pile of hay was far from innocent. Inside it lay a well-concealed 500-pound bomb. Attached to it was a radio-controlled triggering device, probably in the hands of an IRA bomber over there in the safety of the Irish Republic. The Land Rover and the first of the trucks passed through freely, but as the second truck reached this point, the bomber flicked a switch and turned a bright, sunny August bank holiday into chaos.
In the huge explosion, 6 soldiers died instantly, and several others were seriously injured. Eyewitnesses reported debris and body parts scattered to a wide distance. The triggerman was able to operate not just across a body of water, but from the safety of another country. And unlike timers and booby traps, he had total control over the bomb. The radio-controlled IED had come of age. But the horror of the day still wasn't over.
Reinforcements and an ATO were called for as the survivors were setting up their ICP, or incident control point, here at the gatehouse of the castle. It seemed like the perfect location, close to the blast site, but well protected and defensible. Tragically though, that's exactly what the bombers had predicted. 30 minutes after the first device had detonated, a second device, 800 pounds of high explosive, buried right here beneath me, detonated, killing 12 further soldiers. It was the single greatest loss of life since the Troubles had begun. The IRA had upped the ante once more.
We were rushed out down to Warren Point. Amazing chaos, amazing. I'd never seen anything like it. I was a 19-year-old soldier. It was shocking. The noise was amazing. There was smoke everywhere, rocks everywhere, bits of Land Rover, the Ford tunnel on its side burnt out, the casualties, people getting the medics sorted out, getting the blokes moved out, and know that these were your mates and your colleagues. One of the lads who died on that attack at Warren Point, me and him were in the army cadets. So I'd known him since he was 13, and it was terrifying.
"18 soldiers were dead. The wind-blown poppies by the roadside show that 30 years on, they've not been forgotten.
The horrific events at Warren Point taught the operators a number of painful lessons. Firstly, the radio-controlled IED was a terrifying new weapon in the bomber's arsenal. Secondly, that secondary devices were a lethal and terrifying way of maximising the destructive power of an IED attack.
The IRA had raised the stakes once more, and the bomb hunters reacted quickly. ICPs themselves were treated as hostile until they'd been thoroughly searched. And ATOs examined all their routines, introducing unpredictability wherever they could.
Mechanisms were put in place to reduce risk. Quite often we worked in such a way as to confuse them as to what we were doing, or we changed the techniques we used deliberately to confuse them, or we didn't follow exactly the same procedure each time.
At the same time, ATOs urgently needed a new weapon to take on the lethal threat of the radio-controlled IED. ECM, or electronic countermeasures, had been used for years in ships and planes. ATOs quickly adapted it for themselves. A signaller, known as a bleep, operated a powerful radio set from the ICP. A second, portable set, was carried by the ATO on the long walk, right to the bomb.
Electronic countermeasures is one part of taking control of a radio-controlled IED. Perhaps the easiest way to think about it is if I'm talking to you now, I'm transmitting with my mouth and you're receiving with your ears. So there's a transmission receiving link there. Now, if my friend comes in who's had a couple of beers and he's very loud, starts shouting and you can't hear, then that message isn't getting through. Electronic countermeasures is exactly the same as that, only in the bomb domain. The idea is that I stop the message getting through to the device by using my countermeasure system.
Each new countermeasure was a setback for the IRA, but only a temporary one. With a wide range of devices now in their armoury, timers, booby traps, radio control. They became fiendishly creative at coming up with new ways to outfox the ATOs. One device, combining old-fashioned timers and fuel, was used inside buildings where robots couldn't go. ATOs called it the blast incendiary.
Basically petrol and sugar as a napalm mix with a small block of explosives and a timer and a power unit. The idea was to vaporize the inflammable liquid and then set it alight. And a blast incendiary could produce a very big fireball. A 1 gallon blast incendiary would make perhaps a 30-foot fireball, and a 5 gallon blast incendiary perhaps a 50-foot fireball. Now that set off inside a room would cause an inferno and incinerate anything inside there.
In 1980, Dave Young came face to face with their lethal power. 2 blast incendiaries had turned a Derry building into a raging inferno. But when firemen went in to fight it, they found a third unexploded bomb. They evacuated the building and called out the ATO.
The fire brigade said that there was a device under a billiard table on the first floor. So I suited up in the bomb suit and went in, and I couldn't get my weapon close enough to deal with it, so I decided to use a hook and line to drag it out from under the billiard table. So I took my helmet off so that I could bend my head back and look forward, and crawled on my belly under the table. And as I was putting the hook and line around this device, a 6-foot by 4 ceiling panel of gypsum and plaster landed on the back of my legs, which caused my heart to flutter, I can tell you. And I think actually at that point I might have actually nudged the device. Well, sufficient time had elapsed for that device to function, so it was a failed device. But the problem with a failed device, the slightest movement could set it off. And so I did realise that my cheek was up against the timer, and I tried to listen for the clock. But my heart was thumping so hard I couldn't hear it. Decided to get out, so I left the room and pulled the hook and line and got it out from under the table. Went back and set up a weapon and neutralised the device. I laugh now when I read on petrol forecourts don't smoke, and I think about the 25 litres or 5 gallon of petrol I took out of a burning room. It was the first 5 gallon blast incendiary to be neutralised, and I was told that photographs of it were sent in an exhibition around America to try and dissuade Irish Americans from contributing to the IRA's cause.
My own army career began 10 years after Dave Young's blast incendiary. I was selected for officer training and graduated from Sandhurst in 1994. 8 months in Bosnia convinced me that the best way for me to make a difference in the era of insurgency was to go into bomb disposal, just as my father had done back in the Blitz. In 1997, I was selected for the prestigious Ammunition Technical Officers course, one of the most intensive training programs in the Army, with one of the highest failure rates. But 14 months and 200 exams later, I passed.
Complete? Yep, good.
I was officially an ATO. In 1999, I took up my first post in the line of fire. I became the ATO for the city of Derry. Even today, its turbulent past is clear to see. Back in '99, 30 years of the Troubles had seen the IRA develop a wide range of devices and ways of using them. They'd even added some lethal new twists to their tactical repertoire. Twists I confronted head-on when I got a call-out in the early hours of April the 11th.
As we made our way into the city, Al, my number 2, briefed me on the task ahead. He told me a local taxi driver had been hijacked by 2 irate gunmen. They put a bomb into the boot of his car and told him to drive it to the local police station in Strand Road. They also said they'd hijacked his family and that they'd kill them if he disobeyed them. This sounded to me like a classic proxy bomb.
The car was stolen at gunpoint while a third person, not connected with the terrorist organisation, was told to drive to a certain location and, jump out of the car and shout bomb and sort of run away.
Drivers were sort of plucked out of the population and told, take that car to so-and-so, throw away the keys and leg it. If you don't, your family's in the back here and we'll sort them out. Those were, we call them proxy car bombs, and quite a lot of those were used as well. So if you can use somebody else, don't do it yourself. This was their mantra.
But this proxy bomb incident had taken a strange turn. Instead of driving the bomb to the police station, the taxi driver had dumped the device in the Bogside, one of Derry's Catholic neighbourhoods, then called the police to tell them what he'd done.
When we arrived at the scene of the incident, something just didn't seem right. During our ATO training, we were always taught to look out for 2 key things: absence of the normal and presence of the abnormal. And this place ticked both boxes. It was just after 3 o'clock in the morning, yet it seemed that virtually every family on the estate was hanging out of their windows to see what was going on. It just didn't seem right. I wondered actually if the bomb was something more sinister, something designed to lure me into a killing area. It was a classic terrorist tactic called the come-on.
A come-on is a situation where a device is placed to pull in the ATO to try and get him to go further where you have got a killing device placed.
It can be all sorts of things. It can be a hoax device planted somewhere to very often obvious, and when somebody approaches that, they're caught in a secondary device, so they've been drawn into a situation where they find themselves in a killing zone.
I decided to bring my ICP forward and sight it on the corner of the street here. That way, I'd be in a position where I could actually look up to the end of the road and see the bomb itself. It was actually situated right at the end of the street on the right-hand side, and it was in a black plastic bin liner. That in itself wasn't really that unusual, but what really concerned me was that these new apartment buildings you can see here at the time were actually a derelict building. Inside there may have been a terrorist with a radio-controlled triggering device, or indeed I may have been in the crosshairs of a sniper's scope. So I decided I was going to send in the wheelbarrow and have a closer look.
Wheelbarrows had improved a lot since the early days of the 70s, and this was definitely the right time to use one. There was room to manoeuvre, the device was out in the open, and I had even more reasons than usual to be cautious about approaching it. We aimed the disruptor and took the shot. When the smoke cleared, our monitor showed a bag that seemed to be full of rubble and sand, appearing to confirm all my suspicions that the bomb was a fake.
I was still going to need to investigate the device to make absolutely sure, but I still had one more trick up my sleeve. I was obviously concerned that the sniper was in the derelict building, so I decided I was going to call in a helicopter with cameras and thermal imaging equipment, and also send police and troops round to the back of the building. And that way, between them, hopefully they'd flush out the gunmen. While they got to work and sprung into action, I put on my bomb suit and prepared to make the long walk. I still remember that feeling of being incredibly exposed, and being here now brings it all rushing back. Often a soldier's life relies on nothing more than intuition, that indefinable feeling that something's about to go horribly wrong. And at that moment, the feeling was overwhelming. I was halfway towards the device, and you could cut the tension in the air with a knife. Then all of a sudden, everything turned to mayhem.
From behind the derelict, I heard, "Army, halt, or I shoot." The sound of running feet, more shouts. I was rooted to the spot,
Then I heard a familiar voice. It was clear, distinct and urgent. It came from about 30 metres down there at the back of our vehicles. It was Al, my number 2. "Boss," he screamed, "get out of there, now."
It isn't easy running in a heavy bomb suit, carrying 80 pounds of kit. But the fear that a high-velocity round is about to enter your chest or head is a great spur.
We got out of there pretty fast. There had been a sniper, or someone anyway, in that derelict building. The heli spotted him, and the infantry moved in to get him, but he managed to slip away into the maze of the bogside. I just survived my first targeting. As it turned out, it wasn't going to be my last.
I would be targeted once again in Iraq. A war of insurgency that would see the threat of the IED reach terrifying new heights.